Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to week 3 of the CMA Studio summer session. My name is Joyce Byer, and I'm excited to be here to give you the inside scoop on some of the music being played by the Bellin Quartet this week. Uh, just a reminder, if you're watching along live, feel free to say hi in the comments section and leave any questions there that you have. I'll do my best to answer them at the end. And if you notice there's someone who isn't here that might like this video too, tag them or share the video. It'll be live and available for you to access for the next week, so you can watch and get information before watching the Bellin Quartet performance. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go to the video.
All right, week 3, time to talk about our goals. So goal number 1, by the end of the day, I want you to be able to say, I can describe things that make the viola unique. That's right, talking about the viola. Number 2, I can compare and contrast composers Pärt and Mozart. So some of you might already know some of the things we're going to talk about today. Some of you might know nothing about what we're talking about today. Wherever you're at, that's okay. I hope that you learned something new. So let's start off with the greatest instrument, the viola. You'll notice I'm very biased here, and I'm okay with that. I think the viola is an underrepresented instrument. A lot of times people make jokes about it, which I'm sure you can see the one that I have posted here. Haha. A lot of times the viola is an instrument that doesn't get the melody, especially in some of the pieces that you'll hear that are composed earlier in time. So that's what this joke is about. But I think the viola is a beautiful instrument, and it's kind of unique compared to some of the other string instruments. So that's why we're talking about it. So did you know basically the string instruments came from the viola in terms of how they were named. So in the 1500s, a long, long time ago, we had these families of instruments that were called the viola da gambas, which were instruments that you played between your legs. Then we had the viola da braccio, which were the ones that were held up a little bit more. I am fully aware that the photo I have here is actually comparing a cello and a viola da gamba. It was the best photo I could find to kind of show you what the difference was between these early versions of string instruments and where we are today. So if you look at the difference between them, the older instrument, the one that's not like a modern day cello, has more strings. It's also a lot thicker, like the neck part, this part of the instrument, thicker, partially because more strings. And it just looks, I think, a lot different compared to where we are with string instruments. And I like to point out what these string instruments used to look like, because something that's very cool about instruments in general, but particularly string instruments that have been around forever, is how they look and what they're like has changed because of how their roles have changed. So way back in the day, they played beautiful music, don't get me wrong. But as composers continued writing for them, they wanted to be able to do things that made them sound more virtuosic, extra, over the top, very cool, like high range, low range, showing off what you could do. And in order to do that, they had to really change what our instruments looked like. So the viola in its early stages, when it was like a viola da gamba, really was more of an ensemble instrument. It played in the group. It didn't necessarily have the melody a whole lot, but it was very important. But composers, especially as we got later, like 1900s, they're like, what is this magnificent instrument? We must compose more things for it. And that's where we see the viola going from being more in the group to a soloist. So one thing I think is really cool is even today, the viola has the most variation. You can see some of the photos here. Those are real violas, like that people have played before. I will say, like, the majority of people, if you went to like a symphony concert, most people would have an instrument that looks a little bit more like this. But as the viola became this instrument that people wanted to be able to play harder things on, they're like, wait, this part of my instrument gets in the way. I don't want that part anymore. So they would take this part away and they put it somewhere else, so they could still get the same amount of sound, but they could move their hand to where they wanted to. Something that's a little bit different about the viola too is, for violins and cellos, we talk about their size in terms of, oh, this is a full-size instrument. This is a half-size instrument. That's not how violas work. Violas go by inches. So my viola, I would say, is a pretty normal viola size, like full-grown viola. See a lot of violas a lot smaller, especially with younger players or people who don't have, giant arms. They need something that's a little bit smaller. So the viola can accommodate that very well. Another thing that's a little bit different about this, so the viola, if it were to be acoustically perfect, and I know acoustically is kind of a big word. When we're talking about acoustics, we're talking about how they sound, how they ring. The violin and the cello, when they're at full size, that's optimum size. That's where they create the most sound, and it rings really, really nicely. The viola is different. We kind of stop getting much bigger than this because it's hard to play. So I told you my viola is like a little over 16 inches. In order for the viola to be acoustically perfect, like the violin or cello, it would have to be 21 inches. Now look at where my hand is on my viola at 16 inches. Can you imagine if it was 21 inches? It'd be like playing a cello. It'd be so hard and it'd be so heavy. So it doesn't mean that the viola is not perfect, because I love it and it's gorgeous, but that's part of why it has a different sound from other instruments, a little more mellow, a little more covered, not as bright and out there. Another interesting thing, a lot of composers, they died before writing like a concerto for viola, which a concerto is one of the big things that an instrumentalist gets to play. I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy, that they just didn't write for it. I'm just saying it happened. And so because of that, viola actually plays a lot of arrangements. Just like the string quartet can play arrangements of different pieces that were written for different instruments, we steal things on the viola too. We play a lot of things that are meant for cello, we play a lot of things that are meant for violin. But those are just some of the things that make the viola unique. So we talked about the viola. Time to stretch it out. Talk about the composers we're gonna hear tomorrow. So meeting our composers, Pärt and Mozart. Just a friendly review in case you've missed it before or forgotten. A composer is someone who writes or composes music. So we're talking about the people who are writing the music that you're going to hear, what their lives were like, when they lived, where they lived, all these things that kind of influence the things you're going to hear. So the first person we're going to talk about is someone that, if you've been coming to these, you've heard of before. His name is Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, to be precise. He lived from 1756 to 1791 in Austria. So he didn't live a very long time. He died in his 30s. And he lived in Austria, which is a country in Europe. It's really close to other countries like Germany. And he is one of the best known composers for the classical era of music. And like I said last time, when we were talking about Mozart, something that's really characteristic or very common for Mozart, when he's doing like his string quartets, is you'll hear the first violin playing most of the melody a lot of the time, and then the rest of the instruments, like the viola, doing more of a supporting role. Doesn't mean it's bad. That's just like something that's very characteristic of him. You'll hear that violin kind of dipping around, doing all sorts of cool, crazy things, and most of the other instruments do more of a supporting role. Mozart was also a prodigy, meaning that from a very young age, like when he was a small child, like this, when he was the size of my viola, he was already starting to do musical things. He actually started learning the piano because his older sister started taking piano lessons. And so he would just kind of go up to the piano and start playing little things. I don't know if any of you have done that before, or you have siblings and you had to go to their music lessons. That's how he got started. But his dad noticed that he was doing a really great job. And so he's like, well, we need to make sure that this kid gets more experience. So they got lessons. And he traveled around performing even at a really young age. He was playing piano, he played violin, he started composing even when he was 5. Can you imagine? Were you doing anything cool when you were 5? I don't remember what I was doing when I was 5. I was definitely not composing music. So that's part of what makes Mozart really special, is from a very young age, he was just really great at what he did. Some more cool facts about Mozart. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, a classic, something that almost every person has heard of, or the ABC song, it's the same melody. Mozart is the person who people say actually created that melody. We don't think that we're singing Mozart when we sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but that's actually who wrote it. Very cool. He wrote a lot of music, over 600 pieces, and quite a few string quartets, and 26. It wasn't something as simple as just Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. He was writing a piece that had multiple movements or lasted like 30 minutes. It's a lot of music. I actually found out when I was reviewing for this, he apparently wrote his first symphony when he was 8 years old. Very cool. And then he also worked as like a court musician. So in a royal court, he was the musician who was there. Mozart is a composer that so many people have heard of. He's very popular, and his music is really, really beautiful, but it's very different from the next composer we're going to talk about. And that composer is Arvo Pärt. I know his name looks like Part, P-A-R-T, you got the little dots above. He's from Estonia, born in 1935, and very cool, first composer we're talking about that is still alive today. That's awesome. I love it when we get to learn about things we consider like classical music, you know, music for a string quartet, music for these like really old instruments, but the people who are writing them are still alive today. I think it's really interesting. A little information about Estonia, because I know Estonia is not a country that I knew a whole lot about. I even had to look up where it was. So Estonia is in Europe, just like Austria is, but it's a little bit higher. It's closer to where like Russia would be. And it's not a very large country. Apparently it's about twice the size of the state of New Jersey. So pretty small, especially if you're comparing it to like the United States of America, much smaller country. Fun fact, when I was looking up facts about Estonia, there are multiple sources that say it was actually the birthplace of the Christmas tree. So the first Christmas tree was created in Estonia. Interesting. I don't know if that has anything to do with Arvo Pärt, but cool fact about Estonia. So going on about Arvo Pärt, he composed in what we call the minimalist style. And when we compare minimalist music to classical music, like what Mozart was creating, they are very, very different. The actual word minimal means small amount. And so when we're talking about music that's minimalist style, we're talking about music that uses kind of simple things when we're thinking about music in general, like simple things like rhythms or a repeated melody or a repeated harmony. Now, when I say simple, I'm not saying that the music is necessarily simple. I'm not saying that it's actually easier to play. It's just very different. When we're hearing classical music, there's a lot going on. There's lots and lots of notes. But this piece that you're going to hear by Arvo Pärt actually doesn't use a ton of notes. It kind of creates this really interesting atmosphere where everything feels a little slower and simple. So, for example, the opening of Spiegel und Spiegel, which we'll talk a little bit more about, this is what we're hearing. You're going to hear that sort of pattern over and over. And while I'm describing that, that might sound boring. I actually don't think it is. It's really interesting. And I think that a lot of modern music that we hear on radio actually is kind of similar to this in that they have this repeated pattern that happens a lot in a different form. So one term that is actually really associated with Pärt is this word called tintinnabuli. And I'm partially pointing it out because it's a very fun word to say. So please try with me. Ready? Go. Tintinnabuli. It literally means like sounding like bells, ringing. And so when I play this little pattern for you, kind of sounds like little bells, little chimes. It's this really interesting thing that this word, which I assure you, most people don't know this word. It's not something that you would just be like, hey, did you hear that cool tintinnabuli last night? It's something that we associate with specifically this composer. So that's why I pointed out. But you're going to hear it all the time in this music. So we talked a little about Mozart. We talked a little bit about Pärt. Let's talk about those pieces since I'm telling you that they're so different. So talking about Pärt's piece first, Spiegel und Spiegel. Originally, this piece was for piano and violin, but I have heard it played by a ton of different instruments. You can play it just on piano. I have played it on the viola. That's right, the viola can do everything. I've heard it played with wind instruments. It's a really pretty piece, even though it doesn't feel like it has a lot going on. It uses that tintinnabuli that we're talking about with the repeated kind of bell sound. And the title means mirror in the mirror. And when I hear that, I think of like reflections. And I think that's totally the vibe that Pärt was going for with this piece. Even though you don't necessarily have this big melody line that you're going to like walk down the street humming, when you listen to this piece, it makes you kind of stop and think and reflect about things that are going on. It sets a really cool mood. And so as you're listening to it, lean into that. That's cool. The other piece that you're going to hear by Mozart is totally different. And it was originally written for string quintet, a viola quintet, which is why we talked about the viola. So it has the instruments that you'd see in a normal string quartet, 2 violins, viola, and cello, plus extra viola. It's really similar to a lot of the like quartets that you have been hearing in terms of it has 4 movements. Those movements have titles that tell you how fast it's going to go. So it's going to start off with larghetto dash allegro. Second movement, most of the time, is slow. So this adagio confirms that. It's a slower piece. Number 3 is a minuetto, and it's a fast minuetto. So a fast little waltz, little dance. Get up and dance to it if you want. And then number 4, like most of the quartets we're hearing, after you've been through everything, you get to the last movement, and it's just fast and fun and lively. I'm really interested to hear what you think about these 2 pieces after hearing them, because like I said, they're some of the most different pieces that have been put side by side, but they're both really beautiful in terms of the kind of music that you're going to hear. So we talked about the music, time to review our goals, make sure that we got there. So goal number 1, I can describe things that make the viola unique. We talked about how instruments have actually been named after violas in general, that the size of the viola is a little bit different, and that they come in different shapes too, different than what you'd see for like a violin. And then number 2, I can compare and contrast composers Pärt and Mozart. They lived in very different times and come from different countries, and their music sounds totally different. So hopefully you learned some new things today, things that'll help you when you're listening to the Bellin Quartet perform this week. Thanks so much.
All right, well, thanks so much for joining us, but wait, there's more. Just like in previous weeks, we have an activity for you to do too. So if you'd like something to do while listening to the concert tomorrow, go ahead and head to civicmusic.org and click on education. We have a printable activity that you can do, color along, do a crossword about some of the things we covered, and then be sure to take a selfie of yourself doing that and send it to us, because we're going to be entering everyone who does that into a drawing to win some tickets to an upcoming concert, which is pretty cool. You can win free tickets. Reminder, we have the Bellin Quartet concert tomorrow at 6 p.m. If you missed the first live streaming of it, this video and the quartet concert are both available after the fact, so I hope you'll check them out. Thanks so much for joining us.